again, and welcome to the next informational slide for families, teachers, and whoever else may benefit from it. This video's topic will be practical strategies for tackling sensory overload. This is something I've personally dealt with before in my own life, in my family's life, and definitely in the classroom when working not only with regular ed children, but also special ed children, particularly with autistic children. Let's get going. So just a preview of our topic today, what is sensory overload? We'll take a look at that. We'll look at the most common places that sensory overload can happen. We'll look at some strategies for preventing sensory overload, some ways to relieve sensory overload when it happens, and also some notes on stimming and autism. So what is sensory overload? Well, very simply put, it's when your senses are stimulated beyond a comfort level. We've all been in a situation where things are too loud. There's too many noises going on at the same time. Maybe there was a sudden loud or sharp noise. And those things can overload our hearing, especially if we have sensitivity to sound and things like that, certain tones. Crowded places, any kind of buzzers, sirens, and bells. These are all things that can really put sensory overload on the auditory system. Another way that you can be overloaded is by physical sensation, extreme temperatures, or sudden drastic temperature changes, like for instance, going in from a nice cozy house out into the bitter cold, or vice versa. The type of material or the fit of clothing can also overload the senses with touch or feeling. For instance, scratchy sweaters, we all probably have a certain material we don't like, and you just want to take it off right away. Low tolerance for body contact or close proximity. You don't like people touching you. You don't like to be close to people in proximity, maybe like being around people, but you really like your personal bubble. I know that's something that I enjoy myself, and then having that 6 feet personal bubble during COVID really kind of made me realize how much I really liked my personal bubble. So we've all got a little bit to deal with there. Strong odors or food, sometimes spices, can overload your taste buds or your sense of smell, especially if it's combined with a problem texture. For instance, if you've got a chili that's really spicy, some children may not like that. It may just overwhelm their senses. They may spit it out immediately. Strong perfumes, cleaners, bathroom smells, fresh markets, all of those can overload the smell and make you just want to gag, make you want to pinch your nose, or just leave outright. And sometimes that could come out as auditory, ew, gross, that's nasty, from children. Any one of these by itself or combination can lead to a child having a meltdown or an anxiety attack or even a tantrum. And it's not necessarily because they're trying to act out, it's because they're overloaded and they don't know how to handle that. So just some more on sensory overload. Sensory overload may be communicated by a child or a person as it's too loud, it's too bright, this is too hot or cold, this material is too itchy, it's too crowded, people are too close, that's too stinky, that's too strong, I can't deal with that. If if your child doesn't communicate well or is nonverbal, it may come out as screaming and crying, hitting, tapping, tugging, anything to communicate that they are not comfortable. This can be irritating sometimes, especially if it's in a place when you need your child or your student perhaps, or even yourself, to get through the task and get done, like getting through a grocery store, going to a school event, going to the doctor's office, going into a public restroom. All of these things can kind of overload anyone's senses or at least tax them. But when you're really overloaded, it's just hard to deal with those things. And just so you know what that also may look like, your child may be covering their eyes, ears, nose, or mouth, depending on what sense is feeling overloaded. They might start picking out or removing their clothing if it's a texture or a feeling that they don't like. It's very common for children want to take their socks and shoes off, clothes off right away as soon as they have the chance. It just feels restricting and uncomfortable, but for some kids it can be really, really uncomfortable. Some children will just shut down. They won't interact in that crowded situation, or the opposite. They may act out. They may start throwing tantrums because they want to leave. When it comes to foods, they may push that food away. I'm not eating those peas. Um, they smell gross. They might push a person away if they don't want to be touched or hugged. They may gag. They may spit out the food if it's too hot, if it's too cold, if it's a very strong sense. And again, it's not that this is always a sign of defiance, but it could just be that it's overwhelming their sense at that moment. We have all sipped a cup of coffee or hot chocolate, it is too hot, and spit it out like reflexively. That's what's happening there. It's just with many more triggers or things. They may cling to a comfort item or a person. Personally, when I'm feeling overloaded, I mostly get auditory overload. I hear all kinds of frequencies that other people don't hear. I can hear everybody talking regardless of how low they are. It's very hard for me sometimes to focus and not be overwhelmed when there's lots of noise going on. I kind of touch my lanyard. That's my comfort item. I have a comfort lanyard. A lot of people will stay on their phones. They'll just get on their phone if they're feeling overloaded. So if your child has a preferred item that's not causing a problem, they may go to that item for some comfort when they're feeling overwhelmed. And then the other one, it might look like stemming, and I'll have a page on that later. Stemming is self-stimulation. It may look like rocking back and forth, waving or flapping hands, or other repetitive movements or gestures. If you see or hear some of these things, it may be that your child is having a bit of sensory overload. The most common location triggers that I personally have dealt with and that I have observed with my students and other children and people, definitely shopping centers and restaurants can be overwhelming. They are often crowded, they are often loud and chaotic, many smells abound. It's out of their routine. So that's one place you might experience some overload with your child. Same thing with parties or family gatherings. If there's a lot of people there, a lot of unfamiliar people, a lot of different sounds and activities going on, that can be very overwhelming for anybody, let alone a child who is very sensitive. School transitions, such as going back and forth to class, going back and forth to lunch, getting off and on the bus, or special events such as a field trip, a special guest speaker, an auditorium event. Those can all be locations where children are triggered. I know I am at times. Some children just cannot handle the crowds. They can't do it. And they will let you know if they can't do it in that moment. New or infrequently visited places. So places like maybe the doctor's office, going on vacation can sometimes be a problem, a new grocery store, a new family member, or play date. Any of these things might cause a trigger just because there's a lot of new things to be taken in by the senses. Doctor's offices are a big one. When I was a child, I screamed bloody murder up until age 9 or 10 when I was getting a shot, just because I didn't know how else to react to it. It hurt, but not in a way it should have hurt that much. And I think looking back on it now, it was a sensory thing. More than just beyond being a needle. You've got fluorescent lights, you've got antiseptic smells, you've got strange people touching you and talking about you with big words you don't understand. Am I sick? Am I okay? Why are you touching me here? Why do you have to poke me with this? There's a lot going on in doctors' offices, and if you've got special needs, you've got even more doctors to visit. So just be mindful of that. And then for teens and for adults, the workplace can be a common place where you get sensory overload, especially if you have multiple tasks, if you're in a service industry where you're dealing with lots of different people, if you're dealing in a customer service industry with lots of demanding people, a new workplace, hostile work environment, there's, lack of food or lack of bathroom maintenance, that can be a sensory trigger. There's so many things that you just have to look out for, but these are the most common triggers that I've noticed for myself and for my students. Proactive sensory health strategies. How can we prevent this from happening? Well, if you are a highly sensitive person like I am, if you have lots of different sensory problems, if you have sensory processing disorder or on the spectrum, you might be looking for some ways to calm down beforehand. The most beneficial thing to me, and then also in the classroom, just maintaining a routine. Maintaining a daily self-care routine is extremely important. Basic hygiene and health needs. You need to eat healthy. You need to get plenty of hydration. You need to get quality sleep. You need to clean yourself. We feel more depressed and more anxious when we're not clean. I mean, I feel like that's just a fact of life. So if we're taking care of our very, very basic needs, you can look back to that pyramid, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Look that one up. It's good. If we're maintaining our basic self-care routines, we're going to be less stressed. We're going to feel happier, and that may lead to less anxious feelings when dealing with senses. Again, healthy diet and hydration. If certain foods are a big trigger, like hot or cold foods, keep an eye on that. You want to remove problem foods that are causing stomach sensitivities or allergic reactions, of course. Identify maybe some vitamin deficiencies. If your vitamin levels are off, it can cause you to be irritable. You can have ringing in the ears. There's all sorts of things that can go on there. Having regular physical activity is very important. Even if you're not out there sweating, just getting up and moving is very beneficial for your body, for your anxious mind and your anxious heart. Stretching and yoga, outdoor play, music and movement, physical video games like VR or Wii Sports, Switch Sports, regular sports games, playing in the yard, anything to get your heart pumping and moving that will kind of calm you down. I would hope it will calm you down before you do the thing that's going to irritate you, your senses. You want to have regular sensory time. By that I mean expose yourself and your child to different things on occasion, on a regular occasion. You want to have regular fresh air. You want to have mindfulness sessions where you just listen to your body and talk about what you feel. Cooking can be a fantastic way to expose your child to new sensory experiences so that they're not so overwhelmed maybe when smelling new things in regards to food. You can have animal experiences, time with petting the dog, the cat, maybe going to feed the ducks, something that's going to be proactive, just working it into your routine to be able to have different experiences. You want to maintain healthy social exposure and boundaries. If you're an introvert like me, you would prefer to stay in the house or do solo activities, but if you go like that for too long, obviously you're going to become a very anxious person, maybe too anxious. You don't want to leave the house, and then that becomes a problem. So definitely maintaining a social life, I would say, is important. But you also want to maintain your boundaries so that you're not overtaxing your time, you're overtaxing your health, and then having more sensory overload episodes because you're tired and overwhelmed. I would recommend giving daily chunks of challenge time for consistent exposure to new activities, hard activities, non-preferred activities like chores. Cleaning is something that I put off. I have a hard time with chemicals. I don't like touching dirty stuff, but we have to do it. Outings and short errands like going to the store, going to the post office, whatever kind of errands you do, going to the doctor visits, educational tasks, whether you homeschool, whether it's for a reading program at your library or a homework task. Making sure that learning activity is part of your daily routine will make it easier for them to not be so overwhelmed when their eyeballs are overloaded with words. Setting personal growth goals. If they have a particular trigger, like I really have a hard time going to crowded places, but I would like to go do this thing at the amusement park. Well, you might want to expose yourself to crowds from smaller to larger extents, or maybe just being in new environments more often will make that experience not so overwhelming when the time comes. And that can be very proactive. If you're used to engaging in new things on a regular basis, a big new thing is not going to be quite as overwhelming. I know I'm kind of rambling, but you know. Some more strategies for being proactive. You can maintain a visual schedule or calendar of events, daily routines, weekly events, month to month. You can modify for your own needs. Who of us doesn't have some kind of planner to keep track of things? And who of us doesn't have some kind of anxiety when doing something new or maybe daunting, like a new doctor's visit, going out of town? We have to keep track of these things, and children really benefit from doing that. In the classroom, we had a visual schedule. We had pictures of our daily events. We had times. You know, it let the child know, hey, here's where we are in the day, and we're about to go do this. If we had something out of the ordinary, we would let them know ahead of time. Hey, on Friday, we're going on a field trip. We're not going to be going to do this, this, and this today. We're going to do this instead. So if you give those reminders verbally and visually, that can be very helpful. There's lots of different visual schedules and calendars you can utilize. There's dry erase, there's laminated. You can use the Google Calendar. I personally use Finch app. It's a self-care app that has goal planning and all kinds of neat things in there. I use dry erase calendar. I use my Google Calendar. I use a physical calendar. I need lots of reminders. Your children need them too. You don't want to harass them with reminders because that can make them anxious. I know, it's a fine line. But you do want to remind them that something new is going on so that they're not just blindsided. If they're used to the routine and they need that routine, but you have to go do this thing, you want to get them ready for it. You can do this with social stories, a pre-trip, like just taking a drive by to the place. Hey, we're going to go see this doctor on this day. This is what it looks like. Why don't we just go in and say hello? Or not even that, but just telling them, hey, we're going to go to this place so it's not completely new to them. Virtual trips are really cool. I mean, everybody's got videos of everything these days. You could probably plan a virtual trip to your doctor's office. Maybe ask a worker there, you know, if you've got a really anxious kid, hey, maybe you can record a 2-second video, you know, about what your place looks like. There's a lot of virtual trips to places like zoos and aquariums and museums. You can take a generic virtual trip to a doctor's office. There's a lot of really cool books and videos out there to give pre-trips or virtual trips, you know, or just kind of some information to your child about what they can expect for something new that can help ease their anxiety. It is totally cool to have calming en route routines, aka distractions. Musics and audiobooks that your children like would be perfectly appropriate. Having them read a book, a coloring activity, a tablet or a game is fine as long as it's not going to cause a problem when it's time to take it away to do the thing. Same thing with food and snacks. If your child needs a distraction from something hard, I mean, I do that myself. I listen to music really loud if I've got something stressful to do. So you can use calming routines in order to help your child calm down before the event. Hey, come on. So you've tried all these things. They may work, they may not. What do I do when I'm overloaded? What do I do when my child is overloaded? Here's just a few tips that I found to be very helpful, both in the autism classroom and in my personal life, and that I've seen out in the wild, as I like to say. If your child is having auditory overload, if possible, find a quiet place. A lot of families use noise reducing headphones. I personally have a pair of noise reducing earbuds that don't completely close up your ear hole, but that tone down the decibels and help reduce harsh noises. And I cannot tell you how vital those were to me during a period of my life when I was over anxious. And now I don't need them as much. So it definitely does help. It can definitely be both a preventative if you're going somewhere and you know it's going to be loud. You kind of have to get over the stigma of, oh, they're wearing headphones. It's okay. You got to do what you got to do. If visual overload is a problem, you might want to wear sunglasses to reduce brightness. They've also got light filter glasses, maybe some kind of a head visor if you're going outside and it's really bright to block some of that sun coming in. Um, what else? Sorry, I got distracted. If there's any flashing lights, maybe on a TV or video game, if you go to an arcade, that could be a trigger, so you want to get away from that. And if it's happening in they say the TV is too bright consistently, you might just want to mute your colors on your devices or on your television, and that can help the eyes not to hurt so much or be so strained. When it comes to tactile, being overloaded with the sense of touch, if you're at home and it's okay, they can remove that clothing item. Maybe try something different. If you're out and about, you can't exactly let your child strip, but you want to give them some kind of way to release. Maybe have a backup if it's a suspect clothing item, like a new pair of shoes. That's a great example. If you've got a new pair of shoes and they're going to be uncomfortable till you break them in, please send your child an extra pair of shoes if you can, or have a backup so that you're not getting uncomfortable in those shoes because they can turn into blisters. That's a great example. I just thought of that one. Real life example. You can maintain the child's personal space if they don't like being touched, and you are going to perhaps a family event where they're going to want to get a lot of hugs. You know, it's okay to say, look, I need you to keep your space. They really need their space, or maybe ask them if they would like a hug first. It can be very overwhelming to be hugged and touched by people you don't see a lot, or even people you do see a lot. If your child is old enough to communicate that, then that would be fantastic. Cooler, warm foods to preferred temperatures. If it's something that's really just too hot or too cold, some children like food lukewarm. That's gross, depending on the food. But if that's what they need to be able to eat and it's not going to overload their mouth, then that's great. A few more tips. Obviously, fresh air. Again, getting some fresh air can be fantastic to just reset when you're feeling overwhelmed. Physical activity is good. When I get anxious because I'm feeling auditory overloaded, I tend to snap my fingers. I tend to pace a little bit, kind of bounce back and forth on my heels or on my soles. You know, fidget toys, I've used those. Fidget spinners, I know they're annoying, but sometimes kids just need to be able to touch and move something to calm down. A preferred item, as long as it's appropriate to the situation, I don't see a problem with that. If it causes a behavior issue, that's another issue, which we can talk about that another time. But it's okay to have a preferred item to calm you down. We all have our emotional support phones. People out there have their emotional support vapes, your emotional support dogs. It's okay if your child needs to bring their favorite stuffed animal or toy to keep them calm. You can have a notebook for writing or sketching if that calms you down to keep you distracted. Calming music is wonderful. I love ocean waves. I love piano. Anything just kind of make you feel a little bit more calm. Reading a book to your child can be a way to calm them down or distract them on the moment. If you're in a doctor's office and you have access to a book, reading a book to them or having them listen to an audiobook while they're waiting can be very calming. It just kind of depends on the child and the situation, absolutely. You got to know your child's triggers, and you got to know what's acceptable for you and your family and what works best for your child. It's kind of a play around game, unfortunately, but once you do find something that works, definitely remember and use that. Weighted blankets can be helpful, weighted vests, weighted headbands. All these can provide calming pressure to some people. Other people are absolutely going to hate it. It just depends on your child. I absolutely love the weighted blankets, and they were perfect for nap time in the autism classroom. Practicing deep breathing, breathing from the diaphragm, grounding techniques such as color grounding. Okay, tell me something yellow, tell me something red, find something blue. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding. These are some other ways that can be used in order to calm somebody down if they're having some overload. Some special notes on autism and stimming. Again, I worked 4 years in a pre-K to kindergarten autism room. We saw lots of stimming there. I learned a lot about autism there, and I'm still learning. I will never stop learning about it. I'm extremely passionate about it. I really just learned this, and I felt it was important to share because it clicked for me. Some autism brains and brains with sensory processing disorders, they actually process overstimulation as pain. So when you see an autistic child screaming because they're having an aversion to a wet wipe, for instance, there's something going on there more than I don't like the feeling of that. And I really didn't. I had no idea. I didn't know about this. I'd never heard it. But it really made a lot of sense to me. And they're all examples we can relate to in this. If you've ever had a moment where you're walking outside from a dark room, you're on the snow, you're on the beach, you're on the lake, and the light is so bright that it literally hurts. Imagine feeling that when certain colors pop in your head, like when you see red or when you see flashing lights, that can be painful to them. Jumping into an extremely cold pool when you're hot, that hurts for a second, but it calms down. Well, imagine feeling like you're just on fire all the time or you're frozen all the time, and it's to a point that it hurts. That's why some kids do not like being hot. They do not like being cold. They may have aversions to bath time because of the water temperature. Um, Microphone feedback, being too loud, it hurts. Too spicy food, that plastic clothing tab poking you, and you just got to get it out immediately because it hurts. These are all very small examples of when sensory overload can turn to pain. And if that continues, and that's what your child is feeling and dealing with, it really does explain why some reactions can be so adverse, why it really does seem like they are just dying over there, because it hurts. In their brain, it hurts. And just knowing that for me, I'm going to be chewing on that for a while because it really explains a lot about some of the behaviors I observed in the classroom. And it's just kind of an eye-opener. And I'm going to be doing some serious research into it. I personally want to know more about it. So please, if your child has an extreme overreaction to a certain sense stimulation, take notes because they could actually feel like they're experiencing pain. Again, this is more, I'm just kind of learning about this. It's particularly with students on the spectrum and with students with sensory processing disorder. Their brain processes overload as pain. So please keep that in mind. It can really help to have a little bit of more calmness and empathy when dealing with that kind of extreme reaction. Just a couple more. If you're not sure what stimming is, again, it just refers to self-stimulation. It often presents as repetitive movements or sounds like rocking back and forth, hand flapping, sound or word repetitions, fidgeting with clothing or objects. All of us engage in stimming behavior at some point, but it's usually considered a stereotypical autism behavior. Not all stimming is harmful or disruptive, and can provide quiet ways to stim in a way that keeps your child calm. A lot of children that I've worked with self-stim by the hand flapping, hand waving, the repetitive noises, kind of staring off into space. It can be really frustrating if you're trying to teach something, but that's also kind of a way for them to relieve their own stress. So it's not always harmful. It's not always disruptive. I mean, who of us doesn't chew gum? Who of us doesn't, jingle our keys or fidget with a pen? We all do this on some level. We just don't do it as often or as noticeably as children on the spectrum. Harmful stimming absolutely does happen. It can present as screaming. It's harmful to the vocal cords and the people listening to it. It can come on as chewing clothes, chewing nails, pulling their hair, or other self-harm, banging heads on the wall, cursing. Obviously, you want to find a way to deal with harmful stimming so that your student or child is not hurting themselves or others, but they're also finding a way to curb that anxiety and stim in a way that's more healthy for them, or find a way to calm down that is not harmful. Sorry for my long-windedness. Here are the takeaways. Sensory overload can happen to anyone. Proactive and reactive strategies for dealing with sensory overload are available. You absolutely have to identify your or your child's individual triggers and what I like to say is calmers, things that will calm you down. Everybody is going to be different. You may have sensory overload once in a while and maybe not have to deal with it on a regular basis, but it is still good to have some tools in your toolbox. Sensory processing disorder and autism can mean that sometimes sensory overload is more extreme and the brain can actually translate it as being painful. So please have some extra compassion and patience when dealing with those episodes. Always please, although I do have a master's degree in early intervention and do consider myself to be knowledgeable enough and experienced enough to offer the advice, please consult a physician or an occupational therapist or psychologist if you need professional treatment plans and solutions. I can only offer my advice based on my experience and the knowledge that I've gained in my studies and over the years. I am not a doctor, so please, if you have more questions that are more in depth, write them down and take them to your circle of people that can help you. Thank you so much for listening. You can follow my personal website at mobileteacherscorner.square.site or my Facebook page at Mobile Teachers Corner for more teaching tips, customized resources for parents, teachers. You can also subscribe to this channel. Please leave feedback, comments, and suggestions. I am always building on my list of topics. Thank you guys so much for your time. Happy teaching.